So, I'm sure if you're like me, you found yourself walking into a room occasionally and suddenly saying to yourself, why the heck did I walk into this room? They call it a senior moment. And we're told it's quite normal as we get older, but if you're like me, you probably worry, is this a sign of something more serious coming down the pike? Well, fortunately, as we're about to find out, our artistic practice helps to act as a buffer against dementia. We're about to find out a lot more. Our special guest today is a behavioral neurologist. His original degree was from the University of Chile. His postgraduate work was at the University of British Columbia and the University of Toronto. He is a consultant for behavioral neurology at the Memory Disorder Clinic and the Geriatric Mental Health Outpatient Program at St. Michael's Hospital in Toronto, and we are delighted to have him with us today. Please welcome Dr. Luis Fornazzari.
Thank you so much, Scott, to invite me again after 4 years in the previous CERN to talk, to receive information, questions, suggestions about, the tremendous input that art is having in the new neuroscience. I am really not only honored, but I feel so comfortable talking about neuroscience with artists, because in our memory clinic, and particularly in all our studies, we are being tremendously influenced by many type of artists. And as I was saying to Scott, in secret, our memory disorder clinic at St. Michael Hospital have a soft spot for artists. And welcome all of you to this conversation. Well, what is fascinating about this conversation of today is not only that we're going to go together to these influential disciplines that since long time ago have been trying to be together. We have learned so much about artists, but at the same time, the influence of the art in other disciplines is the one that we have been tremendously, privileged, and they receive all this information. So first of all, disclosure in this time of, transparency about what we do. Clearly, in my talk, we are not going to use any influence from the big pharma, but as you will learn at the end of our conversation, I am being tremendously influenced by Johann Sebastian Bach and Franz Schubert, because we learn through you, artists, and the study that we did in artists, that music favor memory, enhance attention, and make our brain function much better. So I need to disclosure that I've been influenced, by these two masters. This diagram, that I like it very much, confirm what we have been suspecting for centuries and have been corroborated by the new neuroarchaeology, neuroanthropology, the molecular biology, that we, human species, are first artists and then the rest. It seems like when we start to be standing all the time as the Homo erectus 1.8 million years ago, we start to be an artist. And there is very strong suggestion that dancing at that time already was in our imprinting. So before anything we can say about writing, reading, is we are, and some very important schools of thought suggest that art is an instinct as the instinct of preservation, the instinct of reproduction. And I believe so, because have been tremendous influence from the art world. The story about the science and art, it's very old. In 1750, l'Encyclopédie Française clearly suggests in the volume 1, number 1, that science and art are mutually supported, and there is a chain that bonds them together. Philosophers, naturalistic thoughts, the famous who are there, all cooperate in the encyclopedia. Unfortunately, there were more than 250 years that the two disciplines never communicate each other, because we have totally different way of dialogue. Fortunately, thanks to the art influence in the neuroscience, now we are not only talking, but we are influencing each other. And since my point of view in the neuroscience, the clinical neuroscience, in other words, psychiatry, neurology, psychology, sociology, social worker, etc., all of us, we have been tremendously benefited by the art and the artists, by the way. Unfortunately, the influence of encyclopedia, that was the reason not only of the French Revolution, but also the American Revolution, transformed the world in what was called the Anthropocene. The Anthropocene, it's an area that I think we are not very proud about it. And there is very prominent ideas by modern philosophers to transform the Anthropocene. In other words, we are destructing the world, for the so-called symbiocene, that to live in symbiosis with the nature, in symbiosis with the animal, in symbiosis with everything alive. And interestingly, one of the premises of that idea is that art and science collaboration is essential. In 1901, when Ramon and Cajal, a great Spanish neuroscientist, neuropathologist, described the neuron and the doctrine of the neuron, as many other scientists suggest that the communication between the neurons that he described very poetically as the butterflies of the soul will be the origin and of the secret of the mind. This is the original Ramon and Cajal drawing, because at that time, 901, there were not much photography with this. And this is the fascinating story about why a scientist is predicting things through metaphorical and symbolic language. These are two alive neurons. The yellow one is a neuron who is receiving information. As you see in these clear dots, this is the communication between it. And in the right side, the green one is a neuron in vivo working through all their surface. In other words, different from the opinion that we have last century, the neurons not only all the time are working, sending information, but at the same time are receiving information. And we have around 96 billions of neurons in our central nervous system. But please recall that most of them they are not in the brain. 80% of these neurons are in the cerebellum, the posterior part of the brain. That per se was a tremendous revolution in our neuroscience. Neuroplasticity is with us since the time that we are born until the time that we are dying. So there is no, rest in our neurons, in our networks of neurons from all over our life. So even at the time of our death, the neuroplasticity, in other words, the communication between these neurons, the regeneration of the neighbor neuron when that neuron is suffered some accident, some lack of oxygen, some toxic metabolic from some neurodegenerative diseases. And this is explained here in this beautiful diagram where three alive neurons, the green, the purple, and the yellow, they interact all the time. And they're yellows and green and purple all over the area. So that, again, is per se a concept which is absolutely new. And the brain plasticity, as I repeat myself, is until the end of our life. And particularly when we suffer some injury, some lack of oxygen, that the other networks, the other neurons go and help where the damage is. For instance, people with a stroke show significant damage to the brain, but also that undamaged area can compensate when trained to do it through rehabilitation. By the way, rehabilitation should be continuous all the time. It's not like when our health system said, well, rehabilitation will be for 3 months. No, the rehabilitation should be constant until the patient who suffered a stroke, who suffered an injury, fully recover, because the potential of the brain plasticity is enormous and doesn't have time. Briefly, I want to mention these new neural networks that are essential for understanding the basis of art. And here we are talking painting, writing, music, acting, cinema, all the art have to do, and they're being influenced this network. With the new idea how the neurons in our brain are functioning, there have been discovered many new networks that when I was trained in Vancouver or in Toronto or in Valparaiso, Chile, we never dreamed about these new networks, these new highways of communication. In the right side is the so-called central executive network. In the center, the salience network. Salience means important, the one who really respond to the event. And the default mode network, who is the internal, our inner sensation. And all of these networks, all the time, they work together. Through the so-called default, we dream, alive. We exploit our imagination. At the same time, because of the communication with the other, this central executive said, well, no, don't fly too high, but I don't know what to do. And it's the salience network in different part of the brain, as you see here, is the one who decide, okay, I think if this is important, we are going to pay attention because, our brain is submitted to all kind of sensory experience all day, all night. And someone need to put some order. And these three networks are the one. What is the incredible revolutionary view in the new neuroscience is that this salience network incorporate visceral motions and interoception. So all the influence from our body, and our body, I mean not only the muscle, the skin, but our pancreas, our liver, our kidney, our reproductive system. So the salience network not only listen to the executive function and the dreaming like, the empathy, but at the same time, the rest of the body. And the most incredible thing is that the three networks incorporate this posterior part of the brain, the so-called cerebellum, that when I was trained in all these centers that I feel privileged to be in, I've been receiving not only, my training in Chile and Vancouver and Toronto, but at that time, this organ, the cerebellum, nobody pay attention to that, in spite that have 80% of the neurons. And that organ, that part of the central nervous system, that we saw that was only good for equilibrium, for balance, have action not only in emotion, affection, even in language. So all these, new neuroscience have been able to open the gates of neuroscience to all the other disciplines. Another finding, the area most important in the salience network, the important network to decide that is going to decide what to do with that input, is in the insula, an area that insula is island, right? And was kind of between hemispheres and nobody paid much attention. It's an area that is so important that have unique cells described again in 1920, and now in 2020 we pay attention to these cells, and these cells are essential in conditions like frontotemporal dementia or Pick's disease or primary progressive aphasia like the dementia of Bruce Willis, and particularly in disorders of affection like the autistic spectrum disorder. And finally, the discovery of the mirror neurons. Again, this at the end of last century and active this century. And a study that at the beginning focused only in the motor activity of the chimpanzee and the human being, when executing a movement, sometimes when you observe a movement in other person, the area is activated at the same time. So this is the system, the so-called mirror neuronal system, or the mirror neuron, is the essential system of the empathy. Is the essential system in how you are going to interpret what this actor is doing there in the scenery, what this musician is going to play, with their violin. Without this system, we will be totally, absent to the empathy, to the attraction of the different form of art. And The discovery of the mirror neuron system is so important that all over the world have been appearing studies about the role of this system, not only in medical neurological condition, but also in the art production and art reception. Based on that, the schedule that all the groups that are studying this kind of activities, they put a diagram like the artist and its intention of produce an artwork that is received by the beholder and inducing anyway, if they believe or not believe, if they like it or not like it, sensation, knowledge, and emotion. And there are different different diagrams. This is done by one of our Nobel Prize in medicine, but it's the same concept. An artwork is not finished until the spectator or the beholder get that emotion attached to the artwork. And we can measure that. And we can, at the same time, not only measure, but using the art as a protection for the brain. Any disease of the central nervous system, today we're going to use Alzheimer's disease. In order to produce the symptoms, the devastating symptoms that this disease, provoke in the human being, you need to have many type of lesion. When Alois Alzheimer in 1906 described the disease, described 2 or 3 things that have been increasing. And it's not only plaques and tangles or toxics deposit in the brain of the patient with Alzheimer, but in order to have the symptoms of the disease, they are influencing factors. They are influencing expression and other issues that goes together. The influencing factors are essential for the developing of the symptoms. For instance, our group in Toronto, and particularly the Baker's group, again, Memory Disorder Clinic, they introduced that bilingualism is a strong protector of the brain. It's such a strong protector that when they did this classical, study comparing monolinguals con bilinguals, the bilinguals were protected for 7 years before the symptom of the disease appeared. We believe, not yet totally demonstrated, that art have similar protective, power. We have been able, and I feel privileged, that last year we have not only dialogue with musicians, filmmakers, novelists, and sculptors, but also in our international behavioral neurology rounds that are for all over the world, we also introduce a dialogue with a dancer and a writer. And that was spread, this new idea that we in neuroscience and artists, we have practically the same language. We use the same language. Okay, we're going to go for reading. We're going to see what reading does in the writer brain and what the reading does in the reader. This Iranian English writer was 6 years in the infamous Ivan prison in Iran. She was the keynote speaker in the last year Booker Prize. And please read carefully what she said. She said that it was thanks to the book that he was saved for being totally tortured and isolated, because that was through the book, the imagination, that he was able to escape of the walls without physically moving. How powerful then is the reader? The brain of the writer have been studied not only like in the past, that we need to do neuropathology, autopsy, but now we can study brain in function of normal patients, children's, all age. The brain of the artist, again, is a very special brain, because it's not only very advanced functions in the area of language, obviously, right? But all the other areas in the brain of the artist are activated, inducing, and we have this is a correlation for neurology, psychiatrists, psychologists, in the different networks in the brain, but particularly in the area, for instance, this is the area of the so-called executive functions. This is the area of divergent thinking. So visual cortex, because the writer visualize the scene and also activate our centers of emotion, the amygdala and the insula, the famous insula. So the property of the writing, fiction, poetry, and serious, studies all have absolutely the same power. Artists, writers particularly, have been tremendously useful in their description of natural events. For instance, our Garcia Marquez, our Colombian Nobel Prize of Literature, with the magic realism, he described 30 years before we in neurology describe a form of dementia, the so-called semantic dementia. He described in one of the chapters in 100 Years of Solitude specifically this disorder that we 30 years later discovered, oh yes, this is semantic dementia. By the way, now semantic dementia is receiving new names like primary progressive aphasia, the disease of the Hollywood star Bruce Willis, who is very known in the press. Henri Matisse described the visual system perfectly before even knowing how we perceive images. Degas, same situation. And finally, our Nobel Prize, he is a neuroscientist, who in a very emotional way said, a brain scan may reveal the neurological sign of depression, but a Beethoven symphony reveals what that depression is. Marcel Proust described 2 centuries before us what is known now as the involuntary autobiographical memories, when he described the scene of the Petite Madeleine embedded in tea, that all this childhood autobiographical involuntary memory scheme. And that this opened to us the idea that the involuntary autobiographical memory is one of the memory that we need to explore with more attention in patients who lost their memory, like in Alzheimer's disease. The other aspect that we learn through professional writers is that all the areas that I mentioned in the special brain of the artist are corroborated in many studies. It's not only that one describes something, but all the areas of the brain that I mentioned in that synthesis are activated. During poetry, that is kind of unique because poetry with the symbolic and abstract cognition at its best not only activate the areas that already were mentioned, but practically put that brain in fire with the activities of the poetry. We are taking advantage of the writers because the inner dialogue, in other words, the self-talk that is the basis of the auditory hallucination in certain psychiatric pathology, have been experienced by the writers for many, many years. So it gives us, again, another window that from the inner voice, inner dialogue, and the auditory verbal hallucination in psychosis is a continuum. And we can investigate and trying to protect, for instance, patients with psychiatric disorder, intervening in the inner dialogue and in the inner voice with different behavioral procedures. And it's not only our current writers. This is our colleague and friend Ariel Dorfman, the writer of The Death of the Maiden, the great, theater. He said in one of their books, one of the characters of my last novel healed me from a painful and chronic obsession for more than 50 years of duration when he talked to me. So the character created by the writers communicate with the writer, and they have, their own life. And this is not something that we incorporate in neuroscience until we start to study. All the writers of last century in red, they describe that their characters came to life. And sometimes the writer lost control of the story because the character took control of the. And not only all these one, Marcel Proust and John Fowles describe clearly the influence of the characters in their product. So the so-called illusion of independence agency occurs normally in the writers. But unfortunately, when this occurs in someone with some brain disorder, like patient with schizophrenia, this is transformed in something malignant. So it's fascinating trying to understand all the bases of the inner voice and the inner dialogue. What happened with the dance? As I mentioned in my first slide, we are dancers since 0.8 million years ago, and dance is universal. There is no cultures that have dance. And you see examples, European, Indian, African, Mexican. And the neuroscience of dance and the dance of the neuroscience are at this time working in such an intense field that we are learning every single day, and all the academic centers that we know are doing that. And the same example of that is because when a couple decide to dance, they prepare their body, the different part, and in the preparation of the body, they send information to the brain, improving all these functions even before the participation. But then start to dance, and the brain, also is benefit, not only improving the gait, the speed, the postural, the mood, everything, including, the social benefit of dancing. And that is the reason why we're taking advantage again of the dancing, improving markedly Parkinson's disease, another of the difficult neurodegenerative disorder that we arrive to help patients with Parkinson quite late, as we are late trying to help patients with Alzheimer's disease, with Lewy body dementia, and etc. and etc. We have two groups, one in Ontario, the other in Quebec, where dancing and aging is a tremendous help in both. And patient and normal aging subject benefit enormously after that period of dancing. And why is that? Why dancing is so important? I think, I believe I'm my neuroarchaeologists and neuroanthropologists colleagues, that dance is a very old imprinted in our DNA kind of material. And the dancing have an intrabrain and interbrain synchrony. As I mentioned, the previous study about the monkey, when a monkey moves the hand and he sees the hand move, trigger activities in the brain, the same is in the human, not only intrabrain, inside the brain, but also interbrain. And this is based because dancing is motor, sensory, creative, emotional, social, rhythmic, and cognitive function. Particularly, the learning to dance. Anyway, when you were, anytime that you're listening in passive way, you're distracted or you're listening music, your brain is not only activated in the language and hearing areas, but particularly all over the brain. So that study done 20 years ago, first in Japan and then all over the world, listen to passive music that you like it, activate your brain in all the important areas, not only in the areas of listening. And that was the initial signal that music is a potent activated in the brain. But if you think that passive music activates your brain, the music improvisation in all these studies shows that the musician, when improvise, activate practically the full brain. And if you want some equivalent between the reading of the music, when you are compose poetry or you are improvising music, these two activities activate, totally the brain. And again, why we discovered this is because those neurons, the mirror neurons, the mirror networks become activated, and the mirror neuron transmit that to the rest of the brain. And not only that network, but many other networks are activated when you start to be creative. And to be improvisation in music, you really need to be extraordinarily creative. So we learn about that. This is the only commercial that a study that we have done with my colleague Corinne Fisher, who is the head of the Memory Disorder Clinic in St. Michael. In all of our studies, and in the red is the essential, 3 weeks of musical brain, influence alter the brain activity, alter the functional connectivity, and improve all type of memory, and also in a very unique way, different from the other form of trying to learn and to remember. In conclusion, our studies suggest that the musical intervention, in other words, listen to the music that you like it, brings neuroscience of music to the clinic because the patient improves. When children are studied when they play an instrument, this is a study done by the Damasios in California now. When a kid is playing the violin, he is not only receiving influence from the position or the movement, and after 4 weeks, kids study before and after these 4 weeks of training show that the brain of this kid, the area, the bridge that communicate one side of the brain with the other side of the brain became enlarged. 4 weeks. In other words, what this study is suggesting is that that bridge who goes from the frontal part of the brain to the posterior visual part of the brain is enlarged. In other words, the both hemisphere using the violin, this kid improved not only the communication about the brain, but at the same time, all other functions associated. This was discovered in 1964 by Jorge Peña, a musician in the north of Chile, where created the first child symphony for deprived kids. Abreu in Venezuela founded the El Sistema, where kids also from deprived areas were teaching music, and they change in the school, they change their behavior, everything. And that had been repeated all over the world. Again, in Chile, the Inti Illimani, a famous folkloric club, create the soul of Illimani, again for deprived people. And here, we in Ottawa have a program called Orchestra. And together with the Carleton University, they did a fascinating study. Kids from deprived environment, either emotional, nutritional, social, etc., were put in this program. And the study that they published give the answer why it's so effective in kids learning an instrument, participant in a singing choir, or doing dance, why they improve. And they improve immediately after the few weeks that they are in the program. Is because, and this was Carleton University neuroscientists in a study that we review for them, activate areas that of the brain that were deprived by the lack of affect, by the lack of nutrition, by the lack of stimulation. So, and it's the same area that the bilinguals activate when they learn the second language. And it's the same area that we activate when listening to music. And this is a classical study, not only one, many studies that suggest that our memory functions improve in more than 60% comparing with when that memory function is activated through music, singing, with melody. So melody helps, memory in our day-to-day mundane function. Let's go to the movies. What happened with the movie and the neuroscience? And I'm going to rush a little bit because I want question, comment, etc. At the beginning, when other group, particularly Arthur Shimamura from the state, we interpret that the director of the film, when create that movie, he or she was silencing, putting our brain in a state that the judgment was totally abolished, and we are able to believe what we were seeing. That was a very interesting idea, and that's the reason why when we go to the movies, we distract ourselves and we believe all what we see, and sometimes we know that is not true, but again, we enjoy that. That was the origin of the studies about the effect of the movies in our brain. And now with the new scanners, etc., it's very easy to understand not only the personal viewer, but also in group of people who are in the movie. And this is particularly what is good about the movies. First of all, when you see a scene that have no artistic, input, like this non-structure, your brain is activated, obviously, because you're enjoying seeing other human being, having good time in a good weather. But when you go to the movies, and this is a very interesting study done in 3 classical movies, when you go to one of the movies, you notice that in spite that you may not like this Western, this Italian Western, we used to call spaghetti Western, well, the connection, the connections is established in many viewers of that movie. And when you really calculate, do the study, the neuroscientific basis of this functional imaging, you notice that the intrapersonal connection when they see a movie of Alfred Hitchcock comparing with the spaghetti Western of Sergio Leone or Larry David, comedian, comparing with the reality view, is incredible intensity because the connection exerted intraconnection is massive. We enrich our brain seeing movies. And what happened with the sculpture? This is the classical David, and this is a David who is allowed to see in Florida, should be covered, because of that absurd kind of situation in that USA state. The brain of the sculpture. is something that is out of imagination. Because the sculpture is not only one who works with three-dimensional aspect, but it works with the hands. It works with the muscles, with the visual system. So the privileged brain of the sculpture have not only an increase in the neuroplasticity all the time that he or she is working, but at the same time improve other areas, the visual area, the spatial awareness, and also the control of that creativity. Is the best example that for many years in neuroscience, we were thinking that all our important functions as human beings were top down, was this the brain. But we know that in the sculpture brain is a combination between the top down and the bottom up interaction continuously, and the body influence, the skin, the muscles, etc. Finally, in all the studies, in all you artists, the different areas of the brain, they interact. So it's not only that the writer will have better in the area of language. No, they have great influence in the visual. Even in the olfactory areas, because when a writer describes an encounter in a couple who are drinking a coffee, well, the coffee activates the areas of the brain that have to do with the olfaction. The same goes with the music, with the painting, with all the form of art expression. I want to finish with a slogan that I think that all school should be art school, based on not only in the study of the children, but particularly when we age, being exposed, enjoying art is a very important protector of the brain. Thank you so much for this kind invitation. And now, Scott, let's open the question, comment, and ideas who are going to come from all of that. I stop the chair.
Stop the share. There we go. Thank you so much for this, Louise. Fascinating. As always, we do have a few questions, and interestingly enough, many of them have to do with music. You mentioned a couple of times throughout your presentation that dance was the original form of artistic expression, and one of our participants maintains that music should be the original form because vocalization happens so early. What's your response to that?
There are two ideas here. I love the question, because a group of theorists suggests that the dancing, other group, the music, and there is a third group that says that both were born together. That as soon as we were standing up, we were able to use both hands, and we start to create music like rhythm, starting, with stones or with other solid element. So it is quite clear that the difference between music and dancing and music need to be studied in a more profound way. But I think that both have a common origin, and based on our neuroanthropological influence, as soon as we were able to use the hands, the art instinct, and I'm going to be, I don't want to be that was music or dancing, but I think both may have been at the same time coming, like a rhythm. And then came the most elaborate music.
Good. Thank you. What other questions do we have here? The stimulation of the brain through music, we're still with music, does different types of music have different effects? For example, classical music versus heavy metal rock? Or do they both do the same to the brain?
That is a very difficult, eternal question. What is, a good music? What is? I think music. There are studies, by the way. There are studies. Unfortunately, I didn't include a slide there, but they compare the stimulation done by classical music and reggaeton. Reggaeton is that modern rhythmic set. And interestingly, the stimulation of the classical music activate the areas that I show in my functional MRIs. And the reggaeton, beside the same areas, activate motor and coordination centers. So in other words, more rhythmic music activate more the brain. So what is the best music to use? Our experience in long-term care and in senior home is that the best music for stimulate the brain of our residents is the music that they like it in life. That is the essential response. Because at one point, when we start with this, campaign, instead of putting TV loud in the hall, in the saloons or the long-term care, why don't we use the music? Well, the administrator, they listened to us, but they put a music that was not pleased by the majority of the residents. So we need to do kind of a census and see what are the most favorite music that will help. And that is the answer. The answer is you may like, Shostakovich, but other patient look like Bach. So it's the one that you like that have the better influence in your brain. In other words, we don't know yet what happened when, hard rock comparing with, with Mozart. But all the music activate, it depends of what kind of emotions, because the emotion and the memory, as I mentioned in my talk, they goes together. The emotional memory is the one who goes until the end of our life. The memory associated with emotion, and that goes for music, for faces, for movies, for painting.
Do your findings show that people who begin to make art late in life still benefit from that artistic practice, as opposed to someone who's been doing it all their lives?
Absolutely, yes. There is a group of studies done all over the world now that, late onset artistic not only expression or participation, but being a new artist absolutely protect the brain, help in not only in the memory issue, but in many other areas. Because in the past, we were thinking that art, an Alzheimer, for instance, was good because improved memory. No, improve many other areas particularly when I mentioned these networks, it, improve music or painting or sculpting particularly, improve many of these networks that at the end are expressed by better memory, but also better decision making, more speed in the decision, more speed in the functions, in such a way that the multitask start to reappear again. And this is a study not only in normal elderly, but also in mild and moderate patients with dementia. So that is the reason why we think that in the influencing factors that we need to use in the treatment or intervention in dementia of the Alzheimer time, already we know that is bilingual, but beside that is art. Art should be used in any of the characteristics because all form of art are activator of the brain.
Your last slide, I'm sure, resonated very well with our audience today, that all schools should be art schools. As a scientist, given today's move towards making all schools STEM schools, science, technology, what's the third one? I can't remember, engineering and math. How do you as a scientist feel about the practical exclusion of the arts from a lot of schools?
Scott, this is a very important question that all our leaders and educators have been denial, have been neglected. All the studies and all the interventions that we see, we know all over the world, learning art, particularly music, because music is very important instinct. When kids learn to read music and play an instrument, they not only learn these fascinating two activities, but they, through the playing and through the transforming the musical writing in their brains, in melody, in pause, in silence, and in music in general, they activate other important area that I mentioned en passant, who is the executive, prefrontal, and other areas. In other words, all the studies comparing kids learning music, they do much better in mathematics, in science, and particularly in language. Studies done in kids in deprived condition, by the way, one of the issues that I didn't mention clearly is that not only that they improve their brain function that were deprived by their unfortunate situation where they come in, but phonological. Those kids, after music or singing or dancing, they start to talk better. They start to get better marks in language, in English, in Spanish, or in French, wherever they are. And that is something that all the educator knows. But unfortunately, I don't know why all our schools are not, art schools.
We have many more questions, Luis, but unfortunately we've run out of time, and I think your answer there has pleased just about everybody. Well, I would say everybody listening, because it's so important to all of us. So I thank you for that, and I thank you for this wonderful presentation today. It has been absolutely marvelous, and I think I speak for everybody here about that.
Thank you, Scott. anytime. I'm grateful of the influence of all the artists that I have seen and I have following, and they are giving inspiration to all our team. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Luis. Dr. Luis Farnazari. Thank you also to our series sponsor, TELUS. Most of all, thank you for being here today, because without you, this course would have been pointless. We will be posting a video of this webinar on our website, and we'll let you know when it's up. So all of our webinars, we have them on copyright, social media, artistic legacy preparation, wellness in winter, identity theft and fraud prevention. They are all on our website, canartnet.ca. So you'll be hearing from us when this webinar is up. Thank you for being here. Until we meet again, take care, be well, have a creative day.